Hello, everyone. Welcome. I have Zeal with me today. How are you doing,
Hello, hello
Zeal?
all.
Hello. So today we're going to be it's going to be like an interview almost format. So I'll be interviewing Zeal on his views regarding the functions of firebrands and even what I'm sort of calling within my notes here the sort of narrative containment zones of these various alternative or alt stream or alt media resistance movements, right? These, I guess you could call it controlled op movements. Um, so to begin, Zeal, you, I think it was last week or this week. You sent me a few videos to look over, and I found them quite interesting. Do you want to speak through
Yeah,
the videos that you
ju-
sent?
just as a general backdrop before you know, a lot of this line of thinking is based on the premise, the kind of Sun Tzu sort of premise that what you're presented with, sort of in general media and or the inverted commas free kind of truther type media is what I'm trying to say is there's an element of deflection, like an element of what they'll be pushing out in the narrative is deflection. They're trying to deflect away. They're trying to move your attention, offset your attention onto something else, away from what they're actually doing. So any of this type of analysis sort of second guesses any information you're presented with against that backdrop. So if you take it almost as a given that they're going to deflect attention away from what they're actually doing, then it puts you into a kind of a mindset where you can, you're kind of critically analyzing what you're being told, and you're asking, the question you ask is not necessarily what am I being told, but you're asking why am I being told this, if you know what I mean. So you kind of have to approach the information with a sort of a critical mindset, like somebody who was studying literature might approach a novel. They're not necessarily sitting down to, if you can imagine a PhD student, I don't know, studying like Joseph Conrad or something, or a novelist. They're not necessarily reading the novel and they're trying to do a study on it, trying to do like a thesis on it. They're approaching it from the point of view of narrative, of like tone, of conflict, pace, metaphor. They're coming at it with a whole kind of a skill set to dissect it and see how it works and to see what makes it, why it's a good piece of work, etc. So that's the backdrop of the thinking to what we're kind of talking about. So if you want to bring me back there, Silas, where your question starts again, please.
So the first question I have in my notes here is the idea of the function of the firebrand. So, for example, you mentioned Ezra Levant within your
Yeah,
dialogue with me in the WhatsApp.
yeah,
And if you look at Ezra Levant's history, as you mentioned, it's with Sun Media. He was a columnist
yeah,
there. He was a very controversial columnist, so this sort of provided him the backdrop of his credentials
yeah,
and his bona fides for the later role that he would play, his current role in Rebel News, chairing
yeah,
that. And again, he's I guess we could say that he's indicative of an establishment agent.
yeah,
So the question is, if that is so, and I agree that he is actually, but if that is so, if the goal of the regime is total control, in your opinion, what specific function do these loud opposition figures serve? And moreover, are they simply there to monitor the dissidents, or is their purpose to discredit, legitimate concerns by the citizenry, by associating with chaos, sensationalism, hysterical protestation? Um, or is
yeah.
it, of course, to steer the narrative as well? What's your opinions upon that?
Well, just not to give a glib answer, but yes, you've answered the question. Essentially, to steer the narrative. So, someone like Levant and Co. You know, d- d- if you can predict a reaction, see, most of the stuff is based on behavior. It's B.F. Skinner and behavior, and there's probably an algorithm in there and an element of prediction, an element of intelligence coming from the intelligence community, etc., and our propaganda and the narrative spinners. So, like in any given situation, they will anticipate a reaction, which is behavior from, say, the general public, the masses. So, in a given scenario, their best bet to manage that reaction, that behavior, which, for example, it might be an anti-establishment reaction. So their best bet to manage that is to actually lead it, to create the entire organization, the leadership, the voice, and the whole narrative of that opposition that they predict is about to happen. So, in the example of Sun Media, isn't it? Sun, what are they calling it? Sun Media, isn't it? Levant
On
and Sun
media,
Media.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So in,
yeah.
yeah, no. So in that example, like Mr. Levant, kind of his mindset would be kind of loosely sort of termed far right in certain scenarios. Now, Mr. Levant is a gentleman of Ashkenazi background. He's a media guy. He's a newspaper guy. So he's, when you deconstruct this far right, you see this sort of a kind of a conflict, and it doesn't necessarily add up. He's from a well-to-do, formerly Russian. They're Russian Ashkenazi expats living in Canada. He's a generation or two Canadian, and so like the point being that when I say you say to someone it's the far right, and it conjures up these images of skinhead kind of Nazi, swastika tattoos, and kind of, I don't know, white guys, mostly white guys, going down the street intimidating everyone and kind of being completely racist and all the rest of it. So, but this guy doesn't fit any of that. He doesn't fit any of that. Yet he is ostensibly the far right. So, or from a far right kind of position, and potentially his publications, his media, his journalists are also sort of occupying that space. But so to answer your original question, yes, they lead, they anticipate the behavioral reaction, which is dissent, and then they sort of lead it. They create the movement around it, or they create the voice of the movement. So by doing that, you sort of you astroturf the movement. So you give the appearance that there's this reaction is happening, and what that does, it's a safety valve. So if you feel enraged about something, any given subject, let's, for argument's sake, say it's that there shouldn't be football on a Sunday, and we, for some reason, we feel enraged about this. Maybe it's on a religious basis or something. And next thing we see in our local town or village, there's a huge gathering, protest and banging drums and flags about, a crowd of people that are against football on a Sunday. So now when we look out our front door, we go, oh, right, somebody else feels the same way. And next thing we look at that protest and we start to, perhaps feel a little bit demotivated because perhaps the people in the protest are not exactly kind of aligning with what we felt. And then we kind of also start to feel that, well, they're making some noise about it, so I don't necessarily have to. And, meanwhile, a few things happen and you sort of, in real life, and you perhaps begin to forget about the whole thing, or so you've got this kind of release mechanism that kind of oddly, it puts you in a back seat with a view to your will, because there's someone else managing the whole thing. But anyway, so I hope that answers somebody your question. But
No, absolutely. Something that, I've been thinking on recently as well, because I've been updating my the canon of Kirk video and putting in infographics and such. But there's more information that's came out about that recently. But interestingly, surrounding and Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, of course, was not Jewish, though he weirdly, ironically, I guess, depending on your view of the situation, he thought of himself as as I guess a Jew in some sense, a Judeo-Christian. But surrounding him was an individual called Andrew Colvett. And Andrew
Mm.
Colvett supposedly comes from Nevada, but I actually looked up Colvetts in Nevada. He appears to be one of, a handful. You could count it on one hand, the amount of Colvetts in
Mm.
um, Nevada. Of course, it's an Ashkenazi name as well. Funnily enough, Erica Franzfa, Charlie Kirk's wife, Franzfa can also be an Ashkenazi name. So
Mm.
you see a lot of course we won't dwell on this, but you see a lot of this. I mean, even going back to, for example, um, Cicero's defense of Flaccus, right? And he discusses Decimus Laelius, who was a Jew at the time in Rome, and effectively it was this idea that Flaccus, who was a Roman general, I believe it was in Judea at the time, he was stopping the shipment of gold coming from Rome down into, of course, the Jerusalem temple and being sequestered there. In fact, this whole thing blew up into the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But he states this in it of Decimus Laelius. Uh, he states, at this moment we are being mentioned by name by the informers. Accusations are being invented against us. Dangers are being prepared for us. And if they did these things by the instrumentality of others, if in short by using the name of the people they had excited a mob of ignorant citizens, we could bear it with more equanimity. And then he goes on to mention that um, where is it? Yes, he go. Oh, here we go. Yes, or if that disturbance was it was at that time caused by the rashness of the ignorant mob employed by Laelius, then permit me to separate the efforts of the Roman people from the general cause. And he also mentions somewhere in this, I can't find it just on the fly here, but he mentions that as well he has to speak under bated breath because of the mob that's been essentially paid to be there and protest the court proceedings outside. So this is something, it would appear, some sort of antinomial. Again, to be very very imprecise with my language here, intentionally, a sort of antinomial theologically supremacist religion or mystery religion, hell bent on power for power's sake. This appears to be something that is done throughout the ages, Um, so it's almost like the notion of you mentioned it, leading the opposition. There's a term I'm thinking of, the Judas goat mechanism. It's that same
Mm.
idea that you actually actively lead the opposition. Of course, as we can see, they're being led. You're totally correct. It's not something you would. It's not the view or the vision you would have of the far right, right? Um,
Mm.
but then again, what we're seeing of the far left isn't necessarily what we would traditionally think of as the far left either, right?
Mm.
These, what do you call them? Effectively upper middle class, uh, rich kids from the leafy suburbs, effectively. Um, so
Mm.
you see a neutering on both sides, chaos being sown on both
Mm.
sides, and this also ties in with something else I want to mention regarding the safety valve theory of
Yeah.
controlled population management. And is it your view that platforms like Rebel News do they act as that pressure release valve for the populace? We also see the likes of Trump with MAGA. We also see Trump talking about releasing four major nations from the European Union, trying to bring them out of the European Union. He's calling it MEGA, Make Europe Great Again. And then, of course, we also have Farage in this country, and I believe you also have your own sort of firebrands and such. But by
Yeah.
allowing people, yeah, please.
No, just very quickly on that. Yes, is the answer to the question, and particularly you can see a sort of there's a sort of forensic fingerprint to a lot of these new sort of sort of right wing and or left wing, sort of extremist, media outlets that are kind of on paper, right? They're presenting a very kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Anti-establishment. They're outside the norm, outside the conservative, acceptable mindset that has got us into this mess. These media outlets are presenting themselves as, hey, we're telling the truth. We're on your side. We're not afraid to ask the hard questions. We're not afraid to point the finger at the real problems in your society. You know what I mean? We're not afraid to be called extremist or far this or far that, or we're not afraid, for example, to ask the really difficult questions about immigrants in your country and about whatever. So these media outlets are kind of presenting themselves as being very much on our side, as it were, and very much brave. They're very brave to be asking these kinds of questions, and they've escaped the kind of the hypnosis of political correctness, and they're edgy. They're presenting themselves as edgy and kind of cool, and so yeah. So my instinct is around Farage, for example. If you can help me out, Silas, he had a media group or a news group in Britain, or was at least connected to one, was he not?
GB News,
Yeah,
yeah, which is
GB
a
News.
relatively new one, yeah.
Yeah, and had he some connection to that Farage as such, or
He
am I
did.
wrong?
He had a well. He was on. Was it called LBC, which is I mean that is quite an establishment. It portrays itself as alternative, but it is very establishment. But when
Yeah,
Farage was on it, of course, it was a bit more both of the left and the right. It was slightly more impartial. But I mean,
yeah.
can you be impartial by having these firebrands on it? But I mean, they were given airtime to both sides. But
Mm.
yeah, he was part of that. He was also part of GB News. Yeah,
And another one of them, which we spoke about in the recent days, is Rebel News, which is under Mr. Levant's
yeah.
Sun News Group. And Rebel News actually, as we were talking in recent days, it just came on the horizon because I've been looking into this. How do I say it? These new happenings in technology, which seem to be all around us and on our doorstep, as it were, and perhaps, if you pardon the expression, under our skin. What I'm talking about is nanotechnology. I'm talking
Hmm.
about you know, Internet of bio nano things. I'm talking about biodigital convergence. I'm talking about using light and sound to effectively the electromagnetic spectrum to manipulate metamaterials and potentially the human body, and or you know sky's the limit sort of thing. You can go into the twilight zone on, but like potentially the brain, the body, and human sort of anatomical, you know, whatever's going on in your body, essentially that can be manipulated. So there's a whole new there's a whole new kind of technological spectre in the room that's a bit opaque at the moment. But for those who seem to be in the know, there's people out there who seem to have a grasp of this area of what's coming down the line. And some of those that we've spoke about, there's a particular sort of a community, if you will, that's presented online, and there seem to be the same names coming up again and again. And again, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, as I said at the start of the discussion, not what am I being told, but why am I being told this? So I found, for example, that the algorithm or the search engine or whatever seems to have presented these individuals to me and to others. So their names, for example, are known to you, and they're known to other people in America, and people we speak to online seem to, even though these people are like us, as we're speaking here tonight, we're kind of disparate, disconnected from organizations as such were ordinary individuals who were speaking, and these people present themselves as well as such. But the similarities between us sort of end there because, and the names I'm talking about, for example, are the Synergy channel, and I'm talking about Non-Vaxxer 420's channel. I'm probably talking about another guy called Juxtaposition, and so if we take those three as an example of what is what seems to be a presented community to us, and the reason I'm kind of casting a sort of a cloud of suspicion around their legitimacy is that it's not that I would have anything personal against these people, but from the point of view of where we're at in terms of propaganda, the management of information, the management of perception, the management of our societies, the reshaping of the sort of socio-political, cultural landscape around us at an exponential and heretofore unexperienced rate. We retain the right to to determine friend from foe because we don't actually know who we're talking about. So to come back to the point, these persons have spoken at length about biodigital conversions, that is to hook the biological human body up to the digital world essentially. And they've spoken at length about it. Now, the lady on the Synergy channel and Non-Vaxxer 420 are two who particularly present themselves as sort of extremely concerned about this forthcoming technology, right? They're very much on our side. They're very much trying to reveal what is about to happen. They're very much about going into the white papers, the videos, they do a critique, kind of an insightful analysis and understanding about its application, military application, how it's developed, it's the potential consequences of it. So they present themselves as advocates, sort of social advocates slash activists, kind of with like a political kind of almost, we've got to stop this. We're all together kind of thing. Go ahead.
May I say as well, the way I've heard, I don't know about juxtaposition or non-vaxxer 420, but
Mm,
this would be a slight critique of Sabrina Wallace. The way that she portrays this information, it does feel as though it is sensationalized, right? That's perhaps just
yeah.
her personality, which is completely fine, but it's almost they have this herald of doom type persona. It's like a doom trap, and
Yeah.
thus it's this technology is almost like it's already omnipotent and inescapable. Do you feel like they're there to spread a sense
Yeah.
of hopelessness?
Well, I'd present the point as a possible scenario that they are indeed, agents to sort of offset and or lead and control the forthcoming reaction to this type of technology from the truth community. Not that I believe that I'm part of such a community, but the one that has been constructed, um, seemingly for lots of people who want to answer questions that they find themselves, they're happy to align themselves with what's been called the truth community. But anyway, the point being that I think it's quite possible that the individuals I'm speaking about are essentially, whether they themselves may or may not realize it, but are controlled assets and are actually intelligence agents who are knowingly presenting this information and are acting as a sort of independent advocate type folks who are, anxiously trying to wake us up and are helping to share the information and draw, but like one point, for example, non-vaxxer 420 was, I saw the other day, was interviewed by another sort of independent channel. I think it was on Odyssey or one of them. I'll make a point on Odyssey and Rumble in a second, but non-vaxxer was interviewed by, I think the guy's name was Truth Only Media or something like that, Truth Media. And I was watching the interview and I was going, okay, right, this guy's kind of cool. Like, and then the next interview that was on by Truth, the next video by Truth Only Media was with this female journalist. and she was speaking about biodigital convergence and the surrounding technologies, including the digital ID, I believe, and kind of getting into your genome and your DNA and all this kind of stuff. And I was listening to the lady, the female journalist, and I thought to myself nearly straight away, she is a trained journalist. She's not. This isn't your mate Sally, who's politically awakened about this stuff and is concerned. You could tell the lady was a trained journalist, the way she presented herself, the way she spoke, the intonation of her voice. She had that kind of media intonation. You know, the way they speak on TV, it's got a certain cadence and it
Yeah.
has a certain rise and fall and a certain,
A trained sort of
yeah.
accent, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got sometimes a kind of sardonic, almost sort of very vaguely condescending kind of a thing going on as well, like you're stupid and I'm telling you what's happening kind of thing. But it's
Yes.
very understated, like, But it's wallpapered over as a kind of sophisticated kind of a thing, But But anyway, long story short, I said, "Who is this lady warning me about this technology in Canada?" And the guy goes, "Look, he says, look, I know she works for Sun Media." And we've spoken about them before, and we don't really trust them. But I think she's great. The work she's doing is great. And then I started doing the bit of looking into the Sun Media, and that's where we came to Mr. Levant, the so-called kind of right wing. So straight away, then, for me anyway, I drew a line between Sun Media to Truth Media, back to non-Vaxxer 420, and by default the Synergy channel, and then by default Juxtaposition. And essentially, I just had the sense that they're all corrupted, or they're all compromised, if not controlled. And I thought to I just, back to the original point again at the very start of the conversation. Why are we being presented with this information, like? And if it's to control, if it is to kind of control our perception, which I would have a strong hunch that it is, then you're seeing that there's an actual organic network of independent sort of a microphone in your bedroom doing a podcast kind of thing. It's presented as very organic, very amateur, and very sort of you've got personalities in there. These, like the lady in the Synergy channel, is a very sort of I would say eccentric type personality. She
Yeah.
has completely free reign. Like she sings. She might have smoke a cigarette. She kind of goofs around. She makes a lot of jokes, and she doesn't present herself as like, she's not like a trained journalist, that particular lady. But yet she's got all the info and the data. And when you analyze it, like, she claims, for example, that she's disabled. She suffers from a disability because she was subjected to some sort of neuro tomfoolery by the intelligence community when she was young, and they messed around with her, and they effectively damaged her. So, like, she says that and then she claims to be.
Does she?
Go ahead.
Please finish your point. Sorry.
And then she claims to be a network engineer in the computer world. So she did have a job at some point, and I assume that her disability worsened perhaps over the course of her career, and now she's at a point where she says she can't work, right? But yet
Does
she seems to
she
spend day after day. Go
Does she
ahead.
provide any evidence of this at all? No.
I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, I haven't
Right.
seen any. She's made a number of claims that she has family members who are, in the intelligence community, that they work in
Mhm.
computing, they work in the military industrial complex. She's got people who've got like high level security clearance and this kind of stuff. So she's made a number of these claims, but I don't think there's evidence as such. But that's not to say she's, lying as such. You know what I mean? But it just but the bottom line, like, the lady seems to have infinite time to make a video and to talk and to research. But I don't understand, why can't she get a job in an office? Like, if she's evidently not disabled enough to that it's hindering her from making videos, because she's extremely prolific. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The reason I asked that question is because It's actually a well-known sort of trope within the conspiratorial world, even in cults as well, where so for example, right, and you brought up a superb point. This is why, modern podcasts provide a greater sense of authenticity, due to these, of course, bombastic personas typically, but it's also as well, people are screaming out for that authenticity. They're screaming out
Yeah,
for that, what is a sort of mimicry of human connection through this sort of parasocial lens of podcasters, or you even have, for
yeah,
example, the videos that are blowing up on YouTube and TikTok, a day in the life, and all of this.
mm,
So this is why alternative internet-based media is defeating traditional legacy media. But one of the primary tropes within the conspiratorial world and such, in terms of how you build a following, is that you will provide them a sensationalized claim, and you will provide that sensationalized claim with no evidence whatsoever. And it's a claim that really, it's the integral hinge point of their entire persona online, of the entire topic that they may talk about solely up on their channel. So effectively, once you get your audience, it's a sort of litmus test, right? A filter. Once you filter the audience through this non-evidenced claim. I mean, it's a pretty sensationalized claim, isn't it? It's quite far out there. It's far fetched. Thus, you would need some form of evidence to back it up. Thus, by getting the audience to believe that, to essentially, drop their guard, um, you effectively have already infiltrated them both emotionally and psychically or psychologically. So they're already primed to believe the incredible. And whatever you may tell them, even if it's a complete and utter hocus pocus of lies, they're at that threshold of either lessened willpower or just complete biological laziness, or psychological laziness, rather. So it's the reason I mention that, because it is actually a trope within the conspiracy world. Another trope as well is the whole Alex Jones or David Icke thing, which is, what do they say? They say they usually, it's different phrasing, but it usually goes along the lines of, don't believe me, do your own research. It's
mm,
it's that most people will not do their own research. To critically think is metabolically expensive, so most people
mm.
will just take their word for it. They take that as a sign of, oh well, they're asking me to do my due diligence, so that means they must be telling me the truth. Um
Well, if
yeah.
like just as a quick note there, there's another one of those media outlets in Ireland that we spoke about in the past in a past conversation, and we actually got a hit from them. I remember they posted a comment up on a video that we posted. Do you remember them? They
I
were an
do actually,
Irish.
yeah. I can't remember the company's name, but I do remember them, yeah.
It'll come to me now. And we had Jesus, it'll come to me in a second. We had fairly good information that they were connected back into Declan Ganley, who's an Irish businessman who's
Yes.
in turn connected to a crowd called Libertas, and eventually they were connected up to Karl Rove, who was a war criminal involved in the Gulf War, and other well-known sort of globalist nefarious characters. Peter Thiel, I believe,
Yeah, I
and
do recall that, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But this particular Irish media agency, they'll come to me now in a second, but they were very much on our side against all the immigration thing, and kind of against the corrupt guards and all the sort of pro kind of cliches. They were they
Yeah.
were they were repeating them ad nauseum.
Oh yeah.
um, I cannot think of the name of that crowd now.
But that's interesting
Gript,
as well.
gript. I beg your pardon.
Gri
Gript. Gript.
Yeah, script, that's it, yeah.
Gript media. Gript media. So yeah, you've got a lot of mirrors in front of you, like a lot. You've got a lot of it comes back to, like, there was another point we made during the week about, for example, the vaccine narrative around the deaths, the excess deaths. like potentially the excess death narrative is a displacement effort to move away from, biodigital convergence, anything you could focus attention away from what was actually the main kind of direction things were moving in. So they created sort of a fake hysteric or a hysteria around something that wasn't relevant in the real world. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
that the public would pour resources, sort of emotional and kind of political, sort of socio-political life force into. Hey, they're trying to kill us with this vaccine, which is not necessarily true. One could argue, that, that create a kind of a historical narrative around that to focus attention in that area. So so then that begs the questions. Well, if that was fake, then what were they actually doing? Because you're inferring they were moving your attention away from something else. Well,
Yeah.
potentially what they were moving your attention away from was the fact that they were sort of terraforming your body, or they were trying to do some other type of tests. Uh, calibrating a kind of some sort of an algorithmic
Mm-hmm.
mass data harvest scenario or something like that. And they were saying, hey, they knew there was going to be a reaction, an anti-reaction. And they said, well, why not let us lead the the reaction, and let us point the direction, point the herd in this direction. We'll say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you're trying to kill us with this thing. This thing is a kill shot. There's going to be mass casualties. You're trying to, kill off the human race, etc. And it kind of worked. That's why I'm also suspicious of people like Mr. Sheridan. You know, he was very much a proponent to that kind of
The
that
needlecraft
line of thinking. Yeah,
transubstantiation. Yeah.
even though, like, I put my hand up. I have watched all of this content myself, of the creators that I'm now sort of casting a
Oh
cloud
well,
of
yeah.
suspicion on.
I watch all of this content as well. Of course, I remain skeptical of all of them.
Yeah. Well,
And
this is
I
the irony,
yeah,
Silas, of the thing. Like, the super irony of it all is you're going into the propaganda to try and find out what's going on.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
That's your, in an ironic twist, like, your last hope of actual information is you go into those leading the charge and try and pick out the nuggets from the rotten apples and say, look, that's, to try and see and where they're going with this stuff. Because as
mhm,
you know, like, part of the gig is to mix in the kernels of truth with the bad information. So you don't just constantly lie. You've got to weave in sort of kernels of truth to keep it all sort of legitimate, like.
exactly. Yeah. As well, I mean, the only terrible thing about it is if you let yourself get caught up in the currents of it. If you simply
Mhm.
observe the currents, you can see the trajectory of the meanderings of the river and where that those meanderings are directed to. So you don't necessarily fixate upon the current, but you have that vantage point of you just know the general linear trajectory beyond those meanderings. um, I think we'll go on. I want to go on to this wide body area network. Those
Yeah.
ideas and some of that. But just to finish this off, this set of questions, and I've on I guess you would call it the narrative containment and this notion of the Trojan horse within the alternative media sphere. It's two questions. We've sort of already mentioned it, but I just want to hear your direct opinion upon it. So I've wrote here as a question. So by allowing people to watch a video and feel angry, you see this on social media as well, the sort of digital drip feed of neurochemical triggers, does it paradoxically render them passive, preventing them from taking real world action because they feel they've done their part by clicking like? So that's sort of what you would call moral licensing or slacktivism. So is that one of the
Mm.
reasons for it? And secondly, beyond the likes of Levant Even Avi Yemeni is another one that comes to mind, and there's a couple of other, even Tommy Robinson as well, right?
Yeah,
These
absolutely.
people are all controlled,
Yeah,
steering the right wing towards a sort of pro-Israel stance, for
yeah.
example. What are the telltale signs of counterintelligence or COINTELPRO in our spaces, right? In these spaces online, and uh, the
Well,
topics that,
it's an
yeah,
excellent
jump in,
question.
yeah,
Just, and it's not an easy question to answer. But right off the bat, one of the telltale things is the proclivity. How hard is this getting promoted? You know, how much promotion? How visible is it? How platformed is it? You know, how big is it? How is this presented? So if you see, would say, a given piece of information or a given movement or even a given individual, as I said, there's two questions. It's not what are you being told, it's why are you being told it. So you got to take a step back from that information for a second before you even think about what the person is talking about, and you have to take a step back from that person and or that movement. And in this scenario, which is effectively, it's kind of like thinking about things in a warfare scenario, you know, where you're literally in a sort of a combat situation, a kind of a propaganda combat situation, a war zone, that all information is potentially, you're what the military call in a zero trust scenario. So you must approach the information really from a zero trust perspective. And one of the things for me anyway, and I say this with a caveat, one of the things for me is how much promotion is behind this, say, person. How big are they? How well known are they? And the reason you ask that question is because that costs money and resources to get somebody up there, or to get a movement up there, or to get a mass movement up there. It needs a huge amount of promotion. And then you can deduce from that person is backed, to somebody backing that person, or to somebody backing that movement. The serious resources gone into that movement, and our newspaper, and our podcaster, and our apparent political movement. And like you mentioned, Robinson, with the pro-Israel thing, the other side of the dialectical on that, for example, we've seen a huge amount of it here in Ireland, was this supposed sudden grassroots sort of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel movement. And you know, and you saw it yourself actually, Silas, when you were here. These marches, we had them in every kind of town and village in Ireland, and there was this kind of shadowy, suspicious, kind of lefty. Well, I won't say suspicious; that's unfair. But they were kind of a left-wing grouping of, I'd say, you know, there was Sinn Féin people in there, kind of left-wing, kind of feminist people in there, and all of a sudden they'd
yeah,
taken it upon themselves to be all about the Palestinian cause. And the reason I mention it is because I think they were promoted to do so. They had potentially, there was potentially individuals in that movement who were coming at it from an altruistic, dare I say, Christian perspective. But I think they were useful idiots for a wider movement, which I think is a kind of a complex to try and understand it. But like effectively, you're into this Orwellian thing where there are no more wars, really. So you have to present a war to keep the sort of tension in the group. So, for example,
yeah,
Ukraine and Palestine were those two wars. And, you know, Jesus, I mentioned it to you a couple of weeks ago. Like, it shocked me for a country, like, if you actually think about it, in the earlier part of the 20th century, the West, Europe turned its back on what happened in Russia with the rise of communism and the murders of 100 million Russian citizens, literally 100 million.
no, yeah,
And the
yeah.
West's, Britain, France, Germany, and et al. Turned their backs on that murder, that mass murder.
Well,
Scroll
defunded them
forward.
in
Yeah.
some sense as
Yes,
well, didn't they?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You fast forward then, toward the end of that century, and all of a sudden we have a regional conflict which is mysteriously manifested out of the former Russian broken territories. One must assume, the likes of Ukraine probably was using defunct or old antiquated Soviet armor and aircraft and missile systems, and and all of a sudden it decided to stand up for itself against the Great Bear, and this narrative just appeared out of nowhere, and then we got this guy, this soap opera character Zelensky, who's presented in the middle of this narrative, and he's sort of in kind of in the kind of fatigues that he wears. He's not a suit wearer and all this kind of bizarre narrative. He's got this thing going on with the American president, the 47 president, Mr. Trump, and you've got this whole bizarre. Anyway, to bring it up to the point I'm trying to make is, in the last couple of weeks, he walked into the house of the Oireachtas in Ireland, which is the Irish government, into the Dáil, and he got a standing ovation from every elected Irish official. Stood up and gave him a stand, started clapping for him. Some of these people do not know. I'd say they'd struggle to find Russia on a map, let alone Ukraine, or have any kind. They're people who have never had any interest in regional Russian politics ever. So they've evidently been told en masse and have accepted en masse without, this is the way now. This is the guy you got to support. We're all in this together, and I just thought it was frightening, frankly.
Oh, we're being
Because
told to prepare for war here. So
yeah,
yeah, it's insane.
and just to sort of, I don't want to go off on a meander too much, but like recently we've been told we're going to spend a couple of billion euros on weapons, to upgrading weapon systems. So I assume that means now we're going to be sending lads and ladies into NATO. You'll be feeding Irish soldiers into future NATO conflicts. But but the thing that got lost actually on the television with Zelensky walking in to the Dáil, and all these TDs, Choctaw Dáilies, as they call them in Ireland, they elected political representatives, was that Ireland in its constitution was an independent country, always has been an independent country, and has all through World War II, for example, has said, look, we're an independent country because we're not strong enough to we have no military capacity as such. We're like, I don't know, we're probably like the greater Glasgow area, in terms of
Yeah,
population. It's like a small country, a largely rural country outside
very
of the.
small navy as well, if I recall
Yeah,
correctly.
it's just a couple of ships there to manage maybe fishing infractions on the fishing
Yeah,
territory. That's realistic. Maybe catch an odd smuggler or whatever. It's But anyway, the point being that in one fell swoop, the entirety of the edifice of national, how do you say it, neutrality was
yeah,
destroyed
yeah.
on the 6 o'clock news in front of my parents' generation and my generation. And they just all nodded and went, okay, here we go. We're doing this now. All right.
That's the same
And,
in Sweden as well. They
it's
only have
shocking.
25,000 active personnel. It's probably on par with the Irish, maybe just slightly more. And they were always neutral all the way throughout. I mean, I believe they were even neutral in World War II. I don't quite recall now, but um, it's like we were saying, all of that just goes out the window. Um, Finland is the hilarious one for me because they will, if a war with Russia kicks off, and if it goes how I imagine they want the ruling class want it to go, Finland will be absolutely trampled. It's not
Mm,
even a question. Um, there's other there's even Sweden as well. I mean, how do you there? Some of the terrain there is quite. It's not easy to defend, especially when you're going up against seasoned veteran Russian soldiers, and not just the soldiers. The Russians have perfected drone warfare,
mm.
you know, and we're finding
When,
with the NATO
yeah.
military, they're completely antiquated to compared to them. Is it just a slaughter? Is it a state-sanctioned slaughter that they
Well,
want? You know?
not. I take the point absolutely, and not.
Yeah.
Well, you see, in the new modern warfare, you have, you've got to sort of reassess it because it's a completely different animal to what we would have seen in mechanized warfare of the 1940s. Now you're talking about the tech, as you mentioned, drones. You've got these meta materials. Potentially now they're talking about the capacity to manipulate light using sort of lenses that are printed into wafer thin uh, silicon, effectively onto silicon. And what happens is you have this substance, metamaterial, where it's dynamic. So you've got kind of microstructures etched into this kind of wafer silicon, as I understand it, silicon kind of sheet. But these structures, microstructures, nanostructures, can be manipulated at their size and shape. So they're dynamic. You can actually change it. And what this means is that when the light, you can literally manipulate the light, the frequency or the electromagnetic frequency of light, and you can cause it to sort of bend around objects and stuff like this. So now you're literally into the realm of
Invisibility.
being able to kind of
Yeah.
literally, yeah, literally.
Stealth suits. Yeah. Yeah.
And but anyway, I wanted to just make a footnote of the points. Some of the stuff I've read about World War II is that above all people, the Finnish soldiers and the people in Finland are an incredibly tough breed of
Oh,
people.
absolutely. Yeah. I
And
don't.
the
I don't deny
Russians
that.
met many, many casualties up there,
Yeah.
with fellas like, I think one of actually, just not to go off on one, but one of it was the sniper with the most kills in
White
World
Death.
War II was from
Yeah.
Finland.
Yeah. I
Sumo,
think
is it Sumo?
500. Well, it was White Death. He was called
Yeah, White
called
Death,
White
yeah.
Death. That was the Winter War. I mean, yeah.
But
No. No.
anyway,
Absolutely. Yeah.
not to get too sidelined, but I think this is, you know, like if you have this tension now essentially in Europe, it's kind of a manufactured tension, and potentially,
Yeah.
like, you've got instability and you've got fear and you've got this Ukraine Russian front kicking off, and then you've got this kind of Israel thing kicking off in the Middle East. And now you've got, lately we've got more turmoil in Venezuela, where the Americans are apparently, we're being told, have taken over oil tankers from this narco president down there, who is also, these narco people down in Venezuela are also essentially CIA. If you follow
Yeah.
the food chain up far enough, you'll find out they're all CIA controlled. There's nothing happening in the world of drugs that's not, under the feet of the CIA and or potentially KGB. The Russian, they're colleagues in Russian intelligence, and I say that, colleagues in Russian intelligence, or
And
whatever
Israeli
they're called these
intelligence as
days.
well.
Yeah, so they're all colleagues of each other because, like,
Absolutely.
essentially, that's what you're dealing with. So, like, yeah, perception management a go go. You know.
I also want to ask you as well that this was probably the final question on this.
Mm,
But in terms of the telltale signs for counterintelligence, a counterintelligence presence within these conspiratorial or alternative spaces, whatever term we want to use. We see, for example, with the whole, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the whole Candace Owens thing, um,
mm,
and this is going on a bit of a tangent, but it does tie in with this, and I just want your quick opinion on this. We see, for example, Nick Fuentes, who has been very vocally anti-Israel
mm,
and anti-Zionist, up to the point Charlie Kirk, of course, was, sort of written out of the script, if you will, right? However, he is not. He's been very vocal along with several other alternative or far right or nationalist media pundits in coming out and going against Candace Owens. And I believe you me, I'm not saying she's not
mm.
controlled, but they're going against Candace Owens' idea that Charlie Kirk, of course, was being dumped by his Jewish donors and it was Israel that killed him and all of this. So the idea is another potential telltale sign is that the topics they refuse to touch, or the solutions they perhaps fail to offer, are those other telltale signs as well.
Well, one angle I think, and that is it's a good one point I'd make on that, right, is that so the first telltale I would say, as we said earlier on, was look for promotion. Is there money behind them to get their message in front of your nose? Is there a lot of money behind them somewhere? Even if they're presenting a sort of independent, so an independent podcaster, to get 15 million views on YouTube, for example, needs a certain amount of. They need to either be very, very lucky or very well promoted. Right? Now, to get to your question right now, what I would suggest, as well as the promotion thing, look for what I call angularity, or extreme ends of the dialectical narrative. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're presented with someone who's either very black or very white, or very down at scale 0 or scale 10, between on the number front, or look for extreme sort of territorial viewpoints on one or on either end of the scales. And the reason is, you'll never see sort of moderate, number one, moderate, and number two, objective, that they're outside looking at. You rarely, or if ever, see that kind of voice, because they don't work on the dialectical. That which is moderate, you will not see that much of. That which is able to look at things objectively, like from a helicopter viewpoint, from outside, and analyze, you will never see that. You will always be presented with characters, viewpoints, news agencies, and narratives that are of an extreme. And it actually doesn't really matter. This is one of the things to bear in mind, that whether it's far left or far right, whether it's liberal or right wing nationalist or whatever, it doesn't matter which side, because they'll control both, but they'll present both and own both, but they'll never necessarily present moderate viewpoints, and critically, they will very rarely present subjective viewpoints that take on the whole and view the whole in a kind of divorced, rational, and kind of sober, calm distance, from a distance, taken into the whole thing. You'll never hear that person. Where's that person? They're nowhere to be seen. You get extreme angular characters all the time who are presenting things almost like soap opera characters, because that's what they
the
think
drama as
you're.
well, isn't it?
Yeah, they think they're trying to elicit behavior from you, because all you are to them is a fucking donkey, a lab rat that just has various behaviors that can be elicited. And they see the way to get those behaviors out of you is to prod you with one extreme or the other. And and what they're saying, if you don't jump to the left, you'll jump to the right. So they'll hit you with both sides of an argument, kind of thing. So the reason I'm telling you is, you'll never really get the sort of middle ground and the subjective, which is neither extreme, is because they don't see that's going to get a reaction out of you. So there's no point in them presenting that.
It
And
doesn't produce like attention branding, isn't it?
exactly, yeah, exactly. And it also may be sort of dangerous to them, because that kind of viewpoint as well, it's coming from more analytical thinking. So it's watching. It's back to this idea of this literary critic, like the guy who's writing the novel right now. I'm hoping to appeal to my reader, and I want my reader to be lost in the chapter that I'm writing. I want him or her to be totally lost in it. I want him or her to be absolutely absorbed in the characters I'm creating, and I want my reader to feel those characters as though they were real to him or her. And I want him or her to feel the tension that my character is in and the situations they're in. And I want them to feel the rain is falling on my character's face in that novel as they're turning the page. And, as they walk down the street of that abandoned citadel or whatever the imagery is, I want them to feel it. What I don't want under any circumstances is my reader to be going, God, this is his second time in that chapter. He's used that exact same word, and it's what he said that like 20 pages ago. Or I don't want my reader to be going, that's a very wooden kind of one-dimensional character. I can't relate there at all. The writer should have taken more time to develop that character. So why? I don't want my reader to be lost in analytical, the analytical, because they've lost into the art of the writing or what I'm presenting, the narrative I'm presenting to them. It hasn't worked. My spell hasn't worked. I failed as a sorcerer. So it's the same for them presenting these narratives and this propaganda. They want us to be under the hypnosis. So this is why you get these angular characters and why you will not be presented with something that's analytical or objectively analyzing the situation, because that unravels the whole spell for them. So that's something to watch for as well. Watch for angular, almost extreme characters. Trump is a good example of that. All these big names are examples of that. Putin, what's his name? The billionaire, the South African guy.
Musk.
Musk, yeah. Any that you can think of, the royal family, Epstein, any of them you can think of, the billionaires, all of them. Our friend down in Israel, what's his name? Homo
Mr. Epstein.
Deus,
No,
Homo
I'm
De-
Harari.
Harari.
That was a wee
So
joke on my
they're
part.
all sort of extreme characters who are presenting extreme viewpoints, or even there's news agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Or Gript Media, or UK News, what's it, GB News, or
Yeah,
Rebel News, they're extremes onto either end of the spectrum. And that's because that's, you see, if you look into their heritage, they're newspaper people, they're warmongers, and they're Hollywood people. They know how to construct, and even if you look into some of their more famous propaganda, Edward Lansdale,
mm-hmm.
famous intelligence, came from advertising. He came from an advertising
Yeah,
background,
yeah,
and he brings it into the propaganda. He's gone from advertising, and next thing he's making fake communist wars in Indonesia,
yeah.
and
Well, they did a lot of sorry to interject. They did a lot
yeah,
of agitprop, which is basically agitation propaganda, and it's
mm,
part of what, of course, Yuri Bezmenov called activnie мероприятия, which is active measures. So
active measures.
effectively, this would go all the way to what I forget the Russian, but it translates as the time capsule
Mm,
um, method, which is basically they would plant historical, you know, artifacts and plant stories and create
mm,
sort of trickle down retro, what do they call it, retconned or retroactive continuity. That this idea that you go back and you rewrite history and all of this, they would revise history through trickle down narratives and stories, right? So
mm,
they would implant all of this, and that goes all the way to, of course, like what we were talking about with effectively, using advertisement psychology to write narratives
mm,
for the most basic of things, even ideological banners and things such as that.
mm,
Even Operation Trust, that's another thing that looks very much like MAGA and the
mm,
whole January 6th thing. Something interesting as well to mention is when I left school, I went into college to study video game development. Now you think it was just, a complete. Well, it was actually for me. It was supposed. Really, I was just trying to extend school. and keep out of work, because I was quite lazy in my formative years. But it was very, very. I learned a lot about media during that, and how to use audio and use visual cues to literally, well, effectively, convey the message or the meaning that you were desiring to the gamer, right? Because the way he spoke about video games, and it was one of the individuals, he'd worked on several Rockstar games and a few other indie titles, and he stated when you know it's like any form of art, right? You're trying to convey your message to the gamer. Plus, you're obviously trying to get them to buy into that message, to thus sell the game and to sell the immersion. And he was big on audio cues and using audio to actually build the landscape like a painter would, or even also there was a lot of creative writing in that as well. But do you know what's interesting? See, a lot of the people that we were being lectured to when they came in from video game companies, all of them had backgrounds, I'm not joking you, in psychology. Every one of them. Every single. In fact, they stated you actually have an easier gateway to entry into the video game industry if you were to, do that video game course and then go on to do like a sort of a psychology, or they used a different term. It's basically a psychology degree. So it really tells you what is at the heart of these media companies. It's controlling people's minds. And this goes on to something else I was wanting to ask you, in terms of we'll use the term needlecraft, just because it'll skirt around the whole YouTube's censorship. But on the needlecraft as a diversion hypothesis, right? This is of course it's a profound and unsettling thesis, but what's the global obsession with the needlecraft in your view, from both that being neutral from both the pro-vax and anti-vax sides, and why was it a diversion in your opinion? And if the needlecraft was merely a piece of theatre to keep us looking, at our arms, what was happening behind our backs while we were distracted? And I'll get on to the third question, but what's your opinions upon that?
Well, again, a difficult question. And one of the easier, more obvious answers to that question is that the vaccine hysteria was largely, it was, the focus was put on this idea of a kill shot, potentially. And I think the kill shot thing was put out to sort of potentially cover up from any metamaterials or nanomaterials that may or may not have been part of the vaccine, and or any attempt to manipulate aspects of the human genome or existing, natural biological kind of setup of the human body potentially. So that's one potential answer, that there was, one narrative was pushed to the fore to cover up other narratives. So other than that, I'm not sure. I'm frankly not sure. I'm still trying to kind of get my head around it myself. Exactly. There's other stuff like we mentioned before, the calibration of something algorithmic on a vast scale, like on a mass data, hyper data scale.
Yeah.
And or a larger, wider experiment on a sort of psychological, social control scenario that was going to test and or sort of correlate multivarious transnational agencies, to sort of get them into a linear, real-time linear scenario, and or to mark essentially a new age, some sort of an event that so there's multi. But to come back to your original question, then potentially also, again, if we're looking at this biodigital thing, that it was somehow a shield for that, potentially, and somehow may have acted as a cover for these new technological advances in the biodigital sphere. And somewhere in and around all that is still a lot of smoke and dust for me, anyway. And I'm not sure. I certainly have a lot of suspicion around the anti-vax camp, that it was essentially itself was a controlled
Yeah.
operation, the
Well,
anti-vaxxer thing.
I mean, it's what we mentioned with the race-based nationalism, and a lot of people didn't understand it. You know, I
Mm,
wasn't taken away from any sort of heritage or legacy that they may feel. What I was stating was that you're given an identity that actually hijacks that heritage or that legacy, and it's a similar thing with the whole anti-vax thing. You know, I think a
and
lot of people were distracted. Yeah, please.
excuse me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I share your sentiments as well. You know, I'm about as confused about it as you. We'll never truly know, but I think this is one aspect I think we can dwell upon and ponder is that, for example, here we're starting to see a superflu, you know, fear inducing event coming about right now, which could just be distractionism and blow over like all of the other ones. But funnily enough, I believe they're going to bring back masks in schools, but they've already done it in hospitals as of right now, um, which could actually sort of snooker me for education. I mean, I would just leave university at that point, but. Um, it's interesting because if, and I only say this if the lockdowns were actually about installing 5G infrastructure, right, necessary for this photon or light-based control system, right, then
Mm,
if this super flu event comes about and we get locked down again, let's assume, perhaps not globally, but sporadically throughout various countries, then perhaps this is to bring through 6G infrastructure, right? Again, the idea
mm,
is that you can get the infrastructure up quicker if everyone is locked down and of course not busying up the roads or causing a nuisance to the builders, right? Um, and of course the logistics systems, it takes all the traffic off the roads as well. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing is uh, yes, so Sabrina Wallace, Psi Energy, she mentions that, and of course you've listed her as a potential counterintelligence agent.
mm,
Um, the first thing I believe she mentions this. I don't quite recall. I'll have to review her work, but she actually suggests that the nanobiotech does not need a needle to enter the body,
yeah,
right? And
correct.
thus she implies that we're already saturated with these materials through
Yes.
various forms of geoengineering, chemtrails, food,
Yeah.
water, all of these various substrates of our basic amenities. So,
Mm.
if we're already infected with the substrate, was the needlecraft just a ritual of consent rather than a medical
Well,
necessity? You know?
from as far as I've been able to get my own head around that question, Silas, is that the body will say the communication between the technology and the biology is a lot of it is happening in the terahertz band of the electromagnetic spectrum. So that this particular bandwidth is of interest at the moment, the terahertz band. Now, I don't know a huge amount about but as far as I'm aware, it goes from 275 gigahertz upwards. Now, um, there's new advisories that have come from Ofcom, who are the UK. Basically, they're over the radio waves. What you can do on the radio in Britain, for example, And they've sent out a new sort of a circular just to kind of in the last couple of years on this particular terahertz band. And it has been used in the past for like radio telescope, basically observatories and telescopes and stuff, studying the stars,
Oh, interesting.
using, yeah. So recently now people have begun to build, as far as I know at the moment, if this information is correct, it's like people have been building terahertz based sort of ham radios and the kind of radio systems for transmitting and receiving ordinary radio signals across this spectrum. But interestingly enough, the Ofcom literature says, right, because it's all licensed. It's like you need to be a ham operator. All this stuff is licensed. So if you want to operate in this band, you can, but under strict conditions. And a lot of the conditions, like they'll give you the bandwidth, so you can operate, say, from 1 to 10. But in the literature, it says you cannot operate on 4, 7, 8, and 9. So there's whole aspects of the bandwidth are out. It's illegal for you to operate on. So that's just a little aside. And so to come back to the point, you asked like, if this is already as the synergy channel state, already they can communicate with the body in this way and manipulate it. So why did they need the shot? So as far as I've been able to determine, the terahertz band, these electromagnetic signals that are around the human body, right? They're natural aspects of how our brain works. To the synapse at the brain are essentially minute electrical impulses. So the body emits its own sort of frequency field on in this terahertz band. But the problem is the terahertz band they're extremely weak signals. They're extremely weak, and they're very, very, you can't detect them as such. They're very difficult to detect or manipulate. So what potentially might have been in the shot was some agent that acts as a kind of it acts to amplify these signals, and it acts to make it easier to interact with these signals as a kind of what used to be called that in chemistry, where we put one object into to help a chemical reaction to take place. I'm trying to think of the name of the word. Catalyst.
Catalyst.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it acts as a kind of a catalyst or a kind of amplifying agent. So, and I know, as far as I remember, she made the point recently. It's not that they necessarily need it. They don't necessarily need it. They can still interact as is, right, with the body. But having this helps them an awful. It helps them to effectively get a stronger signal. So, one other thing to be aware of is the terahertz, and I only have a kind of fairly loose grasp of this stuff, right? So, but as best I've been able to determine, is this terahertz band is of critical importance in this thing, and also of importance is this concept of biophotonics, which is a new one on me, and but apparently the body emits light, essentially, or it emits
An
light
aura.
that's somewhere on the. I beg your pardon?
Like an aura.
I don't think it's the aura that we may know from, how do you say it, like the alternative
Oh, I
kind of
see. Right.
community.
Okay. Right.
No, it may be, but I don't think it is. I think the light I'm talking about is photonic emissions that happen at a cellular basis, and there's a theory around it, which I suspect is more than a theory. I reckon they've got a lot of science on this. Is that a lot of bodily functions and interactions and chemistry and cellular activity, nerve activity, etc. is the communication mechanism around the body is biophotonic. It is light. It is actually light. It's light on the electromagnetic spectrum, but that's not to say it's light that we can see. Bearing in mind that we see less than 0.005% of light on the electromagnetic spectrum. That's all we can see. There's a huge array of it that we cannot see. So, as I understand it, this biophotonic concept is also critical for the interaction potentially with the digital world. So what you've got are these two ways of getting in. One, this terahertz band, and secondly, this biophotonics. And so now, and just to divert a little bit onto this area, and at the backdrop of this, obviously, we've got a huge, we're building data centers all over the world at the moment, and we've got these nanomaterials, we've got the potential to essentially, you've got a scenario where all these technologies are sort of swarming around each other and there's going to be an outcome from this, like a huge paradigm shift in terms of technology and potentially how we live, how we organize ourselves, how we communicate, how our societies function, and all of the above. And some of this would perhaps feed into enlightening us, pardon the pun, on why the power structure and potentially our leaders in world governments, or etc., appear to be dancing hand in hand, because they see that something is coming that is fundamentally going to alter the shape of society. So they've realized that they're acting in a unified manner. So, and that would tie in my view, at least, with all these diversionary propaganda techniques, because they essentially would need to keep the population in a kind of a state of stupor. So,
Yeah.
and just a quick point I want to make on back to your earlier question: how do you spot another point on how do you spot the bullshit? Really, is that in the propaganda, there's no net outcome for social change. So if you're
Yeah.
presented with any given dialectical narrative, political upheaval, or something massive's happening, and then you step back from it and give it a couple of months, and you see there's no net outcome. There's nobody in society has come together. There's been no huge protest march. There's been
Exactly.
no massive political change. No government has fallen. No one's burned down the House of Parliament. There's been no rebellion that you would have had in the past. You look at Scottish, Irish history, English history, with civil wars, rebellions, massive tumult, like political. None of that is happening. The public remain absolutely in a stupor. So if you take from you have no net outcome from these narratives, no net outcome in terms of political change, or no net outcome in terms of the manifestation of the will of the public to effect some change. That's another sign in my view, because it's the subtext to that is you're being kept in a stupor, and you're kept in a state of sleep,
Well,
which is
it's
another
not yet.
effect of the yeah. Go ahead.
Please finish your point.
No, you're just being kept in a stupor. So that's another symptom or another sign that right, this is again that type of propaganda. Go ahead.
Absolutely, and this is something as well that we see, for example, with so Sabrina Wallace. It's not necessarily that this information is incorrect that she's providing,
Yeah.
but I think with a lot of information like this, it's also the framing that's important,
Mm,
and questions do arise with individuals who are effectively the sort of primary nexus point for the dissemination of this specific information. I actually recall, I've got to admit, I think I was probably one of the first to start talking about cybernetics and this sort of
yeah.
biodigital convergence. I recall
Mm.
it because nobody else was talking about it. And I
Well, I
started
remember
to,
I remember you speaking about it. I remember the video you did where you were speaking about. I remember listening to you talking about it. It was the shot at the time, and you were talking about
yeah,
digital ID, and I was
absolutely.
like, what is this guy on about? And then I was like, he's fucking right. He's on them. This is it. Like, I
Well,
remember when
I was also looking at all of this, like paramagnetism, all the way to. I'm pretty sure I even covered photonics and the manipulation that can be
Mm,
utilized from that. The idea of the hive mind, and this was information that was coming from certain whistleblowers who are a lot of them are dead now, funnily enough,
mm,
um, which really tells you everything from
yeah.
the likes of DARPA and even MIT. and they were
Mm.
discussing that this was well back in like 2004 or 5, and they were saying this is coming. It's coming in the next 2 decades. They're going to be bringing this out. Of course, they
Mm.
all ended up dead. I actually was censored on BitChute of all places when I started coming out about this. I went from thousands, tens of thousands of views each video. I went down to less than a couple of hundred per video, and so I effectively lost all reach. Right? They'd algorithmically strangled me. Why? Because, well, as we're seeing now, and like what you're stating, they had to control the release of this information and thus the steering of the narrative. I was too quick to the punch, so to say, right? So I
Mm.
had, and I wasn't part of the in club or the in group for the dissemination of this information. So I was thus swiftly cut off. But I don't actually think the information is incorrect. I think this is where they're going. Why do I think that? Because I've got to be honest, if I was going to try and control the world and ensure an autopoietic system, which is a system of negentropy
Mm.
and which is self-regulating within a closed feedback loop, and this is what we're talking about with the likes of the infrastructure plus the biological system that will be controlled by said infrastructural means, it's really to establish this system of negentropy that cybernetics were talking about since God knows when. They were also talking
Mm.
about the implantable sense organs, but as you're saying now, and as I was saying back then, and as Sabrina Wallace and the rest of them are saying now, this can be done through wireless means remotely.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
but it's interesting the way they frame it. So they frame it as though, I think Sabrina Wallace she states that constantly that everyone is already a cyborg. That's like one of her
Yeah.
catchphrases at this point, and like some sort of digital Brady Bunch, and of course that induces despair, right? But do you view that as their role in terms of demoralization? Is this more of the, as Yuri Bezmenov stated, of the KGB, their role in demoralization?
Coming in.
Um, yeah. Do you think that's what she is? Do you think she's a demoralization agent sent to convince us, right, that the battle for our biology is already lost? And furthermore, along with that, what solutions does she give at all? Does she give any solutions at
Well,
all
the,
to
the
this
one thing
insurmountable
that she
problem?
seems to come up with quite a bit is, you know, she'll essentially say, like, you're essentially, they've lied to you about your metabolism, your body. They've lied to you. You are basically sort of a biomagnetic creature, you know, and they essentially, humanity has been, the real nature of their body, their biology has been withheld from them. So her whole kind of spiel is that humanity should be told exactly how their body works with all these sort of you know magnetism and electrical kind of what's happening with the body in that sense, and it should be explained to them, and all of this technology should be used for the good of humanity rather than for the good of the few and the mega rich who can afford to be augmented, have their bodies augmented using this technology, etc. So she's coming at it from a sort of a Joan of Arc, I want to help everyone kind of thing, altruistic savior, sort of how do you say it? Um,
Yeah, it's the
you know,
savior complex,
yeah,
effectively.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. What did they call it in the religious thing? She's
restitutor orbis, restorer of the world.
yeah. So
Yeah.
she's out to help us all, and let's be fair with this. This can help everyone. And why are you being so mean about this? And why are you
Mm.
keeping it under wraps? And why are you lying to everyone? Let's come out and say it. And then her other thing is that, like, yeah. So she's kind of presenting that she's a leader for the greater good of humanity. So that's the way
She's
she's kind
a
of
John
presenting herself.
Connor, essentially,
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
20. But what is she? What is she? So she's demanding honesty from the establishment,
Well,
which is
what she,
like, yeah,
well, her other kind of side of the shtick is that all of this information is sort of in the public domain. So it's all in the white papers. There's a bunch of academic research, published research, which purports
Mhm.
to, illuminate the fact that all this
She's right,
technology
yeah.
is.
She's absolutely correct, yeah. Yeah.
So she's saying, she's trying to sort of, if you will, wake the people up, and she's trying to explain. She's made sort of more
Mm.
bite-sized presentations where there's kind of bullet points and schematics and little diagrams and.
Is she previous? So she's made presentations. She's trying to get the information out and wake the people up. I mean, again, it's if you're demanding honesty from the establishment. I mean, that's like demanding, the I don't know, the Catholic Church stop, diddling children or something. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Or asking, if you're trying to wake the people up, it's like asking the sheep to, begin to protest the price of mutton. But so is she previous? So if I'm correct, she's previously worked on this technology. Hence why. So she's a sort of
Ye-
whistleblower,
Kind of like her background is
right?
her family background are how do I say it, well got in the intelligence services and military industrial complex. They have quote, like she'll say, my family have high level clearances, they've all high level
Right.
security clearances, and I've got, they're working in these various kind of government departments, military, uh, you know.
In that she uses the present tense when discussing that.
Yes.
Well,
So and yeah.
it's rather interesting, isn't it? Because you would think if you had this sort of dynasty that are embedded with this technology, and of course the defense industry, and of course the defense sector of the public defense sector, you would think by you coming out and whistleblowing on this information, attempting to fuel an anti-establishmentarian movement, you think that would negate, and of course you're mentioning about, of course, sort of your entire family have these security clearances. You think that would negate as the Department of Defense or what have you would just chuck out her family from their jobs, or of course would deal with her. You know,
Yeah.
would that not be? I
Possibly, yeah.
yeah. Do you see what I'm
And
saying?
not, I do. And another kind of an angle on it is, and
Yeah.
again, this goes back to the earlier list of potential giveaways, is that there's a singular focus on the punch bag point that they have as part of their sort of character narrative. So she's singularly fixated on this technology. So all her content, all her spiel, all her sort of political sensibility, socio-political sensibility is all based around just this tech, nothing else. So every time you hear her speaking, it's about this and nothing else.
Yes.
So that in itself is sort of like, anyone who's listened to our conversations, for example,
Yeah.
we waver. We could go anywhere from, the pyramids to the
Oh
occult
yeah. Yeah.
to, John D, Aleister Crowley to, to
Yeah.
the kill shot to God knows what, the power structure,
And
propaganda. So
and
like
a lot of people mention as well in the comments, what a lot of people mention that, why don't you stick to like one topic? And we
well
talk
this
about
is
these things for our own edification.
well, I suppose you see, we're talking about essentially
Yeah.
the world as is and experience as is in the
Yeah.
20th century. So it's multi-complex,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of different angles on the thing. So I
Yeah.
think that's normal, natural human instinct of
Absolutely.
curiosity. It's not like you're just interested in one. So what I'm saying is,
Mm.
I'm not saying it's suspicious about her, but I'm saying it is noteworthy. It's remarkable that this is the only interest area she has, and that she has decided to make a sort of a
But
political platform on it, where she's,
see, that's the thing. I think it is suspicious because think about it. See, if your primary focus was on this technology and you had a technical background in it by your own admission, and
mm,
you're studying it constantly, you're looking through the various articles and papers, you're keeping abreast of the developments of the technology. and you have that technical know-how, why would you engage in the impossibility, the extreme, I mean,
mm,
it's not even the high road, it is the literal road of most resistance,
mm,
which is trying to wake up a vast segment of the population to a technology they can't even comprehend. I mean, it's like going in
mm,
front of a bunch of troglodyte Neanderthals that haven't even, that are 100,000 years off developing
mm,
fire, and saying,
mm,
"Look, I have this device that allows us to, sail the seven seas."
mm,
They couldn't even comprehend that, never let alone even they wouldn't be able to grasp it. They'd think it's magic, right? Which is what
mm,
a lot of people look at this technology and they see it as just pure conspiracy theory, which is of course our modern day equivalent of simply just sort of shooing it away in terms of our from our psyche, and it's a way to simply just disregard it as magic. Why doesn't she take the path of least resistance with her advanced knowledge in this field, plus technical know-how, plus connections, which would be covert if she didn't blab her mouth off about it, in terms of her family? Why doesn't she use it to develop her own technology? To
mm,
effectively decentralize it and to proliferate the technology to people, to show that it works, to demonstrate that it works, to demonstrate how we can use it against, X, Y, and Z of bad state actors. I've got to be honest that it screams to me as very suspicious. How do you feel?
mm. Yeah, potentially suspicious. Yeah, and the other one is like there's an awful lot of use of the glossary of terms and acronyms and like a lot of terminology that is you know technical, but it's just the terminology of the technical. She doesn't really ever display any sort of mechanical
No,
insight
I agree.
into, I don't see anyone. It's like someone, you know who was trying to blag their way around talking to you about an engine, and they were talking about the piston, and they were talking about the camshaft, and they were talking about the air intake, and they were talking about the spark and the ignition and the
Yeah,
transmission, and deep, and you're listening to this and you're going, okay, they've got all the, and the more you're listening, you're thinking
surface
this
level.
person has zero kind of mechanical
Mhm.
basic
Yeah,
kind of underlying concept of how these, of how what torque is, or what, output, or of compression is,
yeah.
like the underlying kind
Mhm.
of, the underlying kind.
Yeah, they have no understanding of the know-how and the mechanics.
Yeah,
It's
but they
you
can
know
push
when
it away with the glossary, like kind of
yes,
thing.
the
But
jargon.
they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of jargon, like, and the
Mhm.
more you're listening to it, like the jargon's great, like, because it's all novel technology, and you're kind of, wow, what is that? I've got to look that up. What is that? I got to look that up. And when you're kind of, after a while, you're kind of going, hang on a minute here, like, you walk away from it and you go, well, what have I learned here? What do I know about this? And you're kind of scratching. You're like a cat
Yeah.
scratching at the door. You're kind of, you haven't picked anything up, because it's very
Mhm.
difficult to know. We've just got a bunch of jargon, a bunch of concepts, and it's all rather loose, like, it's all rather specious, literally specious. There's ever that word was.
I've heard her presentations, and it reminds me of course, I don't have a technical background in any of this stuff, but I have a general understanding. I can reason things, and I have a general understanding of concepts, mechanical concepts, and of course, I have quite an expansive vocabulary, right? So
Mm,
um, in Latin as well, right? And so I can generally understand and just work out what certain terminology, jargon terminology may infer or mean, right? And of course, I can do more study on it. That's what I was doing with my discussions and presentations back when, I say, 4 or 5 years ago, No, sorry, 3, 4 years ago, when I was touching upon all of this stuff, and it came across her. Of course, I don't have an experiential or technical background in it. Her presentations came across as similar to my presentations. She didn't look like what you're saying. She displayed a surface level understanding, and she, sprinkled in some sort of jargonic terms to, well,
Mm.
I mean, it's bedazzling language, isn't it? It's to
Yeah,
bedazzle people.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, she must know what she's talking about, right? So
Mm,
it's like in the RPG games, you press the speech check button,
mm,
and you do a speech check for science, for example, right? And the you'll either pass it or fail it. The person will either believe you or they'll disbelieve you in terms of your technical know-how, right?
mm.
Um, I think that's what it feels like she's pulling off. It may not be necessarily she may not be a state actor. She may just be
Mm.
a complete. They may do it for egomaniacal reasons. Who knows? But it is interesting to say the least.
Mm.
Um, I'm not saying that what she's saying is incorrect, but it's like what you're
No,
saying. It's sort
I
of
don't
surface level,
think. Yeah, it's you know,
and it's sensationalism as well.
yeah, and it's the MO. It's like, well, what's your motivation? Like, has someone close to you died because of this technology, or has your half your neighborhood been killed off, or is there? It's like she's highly motivated and highly politicized over this tech, and it's like, well, where are you coming from? Like, what has happened that has set you alight over this
Hmm.
stuff? And and I don't see that there's anything particularly there. Like, it's what's it? The lady that protests too much. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, literally, why
Yeah,
you protest over what? Like,
yeah.
what has awakened you like this? What is you know? So, and it ties in with the earlier question as well. Like, it's like, you're living in an age, of tumultuous change. Like, and there is, from what I can see, very little, if any, sort of voice for this generation, the generation of young people now. I don't see any massive political outpouring from them about
No.
concern about where they want, about being energized, or any manifestation of their will around this stuff. They seem totally scattered, and all we're left are with these dialectical propaganda narratives. And you're like, well, where's the people? Is
Mhm.
it just you and me talking about this here? I mean, where's the?
Well,
There must
I
be.
think that's the reason for these influencers. I think it's to fragment people, and as well a lot of the ideologies. So you have different flavors of even actually inside ideologies. So you have ideologies and ideologies. So a lot of this is just that, you have, like what you're saying, that what they're doing is trancheing up all the energy and turning it into this sort of self-referential loop. And well, this ties me into another question I was going to ask you, in fact.
Mm,
Uh, if it's almost like what you're saying, we're living in a glitched reality, right? And so if they are using the electromagnetic spectrum or some form of
mm,
psychotronic weaponry or photonic weaponry, right?
mm,
Biodigital weaponry to redesign what God created, so to say, right?
mm,
Or
mm,
the natural world as a
mm,
reversal. Does this explain the rise and sudden inexplicable neurological issues, neuroses throughout society, narcissism, the zombie-like behavior we see in major cities? Is this sort of a test run of remote neuromodulation, that of for example, TikTok? I mean, it's even in the name, the sort of the pendulum swing of a metronome to put someone into a hypnagogic state. What's your opinions upon that?
well, I'll just throw out an answer to that. Like, and one answer on that is like basically they want us to think that everyone's thick. So even that is a narrative in itself that's been promoted, possibly, that the public are basically stupid and are in a stupor as well. Now, whether they actually are or not may be a matter of degrees, but certainly it behooves the propagandists that we all accept that as a reality, carte blanche, and don't question it. However, so what I'm kind of hinting at there is, like, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but not everyone is fooled. You know what I mean? So there's a whole bunch of people that are turned on as such, switched on. They're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. But secondly, I do think that there's some sort of a psychological effect of um, being surrounded by the storm and people doing the ostrich thing, putting their heads in the sand and kind of shutting themselves out from it. And a lot of that is human, because they need to get on with their day-to-day lives. They need to pay the bills. They need to get to work. They need to get home, cook dinner. They need to wash their clothes and go to bed and get up for work the next morning. Simple as that. And they don't necessarily, if these things don't present, if the world doesn't present a problem for them in their own living room, they can keep it at arm's length. So they don't necessarily need to worry about it in their immediate sort of day-to-day sort of personal space, even though it's obviously affecting everything around them at the same time. But all of this is sort of potentially as well having a kind of a strange psychological side effect on the group and on individuals as well, where you are getting these kind of as you're saying there, an element of these symptoms of this kind of dysfunctional world, where people are, their behavior and how they present and their kind of the way their mind is working is unusual. And as well as that, like, it's the way the information is working, and things like the internet and the availability of information and how media has influenced how we interact and how we work, etc., as well, as all had a profound impact on just consciousness, because we think we're thinking differently as well. So the rug's been pulled from under our feet in that sense as well. So we're kind of seeing things in a different way. And so there's probably multiple kind of complex interweaving factors involved in the answer to answer your question there, like, but and some of it is in the self as well. It's in us. It's in how we perceive it, how we perceive people around us, because we in turn are sort of alienated. We in turn are trying to reassess our environments. We in turn are trying to reassess our societies. We feel disenfranchised and kind of potentially frightened by things, or enraged to varying degrees, or a whole mix of emotions. So we look out into the world to try and make sense of it, and from our viewpoint from that, it colors what we see, and it creates, it's back to, like, to this idea of creating the what's the word that you use frequently, where these energies go into this thing, and it becomes takes on its own life form.
Egregore.
Yeah, so it's like an egregoric kind of thing, like, so there's a whole, but the final point on it, all of this together, throw all what I just said into a bowl and mix it around, add some sugar and salt and a sprinkle of pepper, and you've got a heady mixture there of a tidal wave of change. You know what I mean? And people and societies and individuals trying to make sense of all that in the middle of all that.
Yeah. So it is it's a tragic dialectic, isn't it? If you look at it from the state level downwards. So what they've established is a a problem, a reaction, and then of
Mm,
course, well, they know the reactions coming. They know people are looking for models of explication to
mm,
understand this change and to quantify it within their own minds, and
mm,
to even qualitatively analyze it. So again, they're all too happy to produce these influencers, these content creators, should you say,
mm,
these controlled opposition leaders, to provide the illusion of choice, the illusion of freedom, the illusion of agency within a,
mm,
a system that's, quite frankly, I mean, the solutions to all of this have already been prefigured. The
mm,
narratives are steered, or manipulate in such a way because they want to go towards this predetermined destination. Only by, extricating ourselves from that current, from that tidal wave, can we take a step back and see it all for the illusion that it is? It's a hyper reality, And here's another thing I wish to ask of you.
Mm.
So we see when I'm looking into Kabbalah and the sort of mystical dimensions of all of this. And we've been talking about, of course, the terahertz band of 6G, which that itself goes into light waves that are even beyond what the human mind can conceive of. So it exists, I guess, in some sort of supernal realm of a frequency range. And then we're talking about as well Li-Fi or light fidelity and LED infrastructures. This sort of read and write mechanism for the human nervous system. All of this biodigital convergence technology. So I guess you could say that these digital tech bros or the tech overlords of this new intrepid age, they are the sort of wizards that are harnessing this spectrum to redesign the primordial creation that we see around us. So I
Yeah.
guess it's a sort of Promethean ambition of theirs, right? And you used the phrase. Pardon me, I used the phrase, to redesign what God has created. And I think Sabrina used the phrase as well. Um,
Mm.
do do you view this technological push as merely a surveillance project, or do you view it as an alchemical undertaking? And moreover, as well, are they trying to sever the connection between the human soul and the creator, or the human soul and the spiritual or psycho-spiritual essence of us, the divine spark, whatever we want to describe it as, by effectively filling, I couldn't think of another term here, so I put ether, quote unquote ether, that
Yeah.
sort of abyssal space with their own digital noise, their own digital systemic tendrils, if you will. What's your opinions upon that?
Well, the easiest way to answer that question is just say yes. Sure, all of the above. That's like there's the when you bring in like when you talk about the Kabbalah and the alchemical, like it has such an impact on the discussion because it's as if you take a sledgehammer and just smash it down on top of everything we've been speaking about for the last hour or however long we've been speaking, and it just goes into smithereens, like, and it into dust, and it just that dust goes up into the cosmos and up into the night sky, and there's you watch it flown away toward distant stars, and you just get lost, like, because, and then it brings it all back home to you that there's something much much bigger here, that than is right up in front of our face. There's a much deeper, wider, and much older, critically much older, and much more of a cyclical nature. And so yes, absolutely, that area must, and like that's why, the person who, and it's a fair criticism, why don't you stick to the one topic? Because you can't, you can't analyze this simply on what's happening in the terahertz band without eventually arriving at Lucifer, without eventually arriving at the black dominance over the black and white squares, without eventually going from Akhenaten back to the old gods before monotheism. So all of that, it's like as if you arrive at this last door of trying to understand this thing, and you open that door, and then you're just left with an infinite chasmic abyss, unending, like, so so that in itself as well is enlightening at the same time. This is kind of paralyzing, because in that moment you kind of realize your own humanity, and you realize that you're a blip in time, at the backdrop of this huge, bigger spectrum, you know. So I'm myself, I'm not sure how to take that myself personally, because I find it disarming and at the same time enlightening in a way, you know, and at the same time incredibly empowering, conversely, and kind of, um, you know, paradoxically empowering, because I think that is ultimately where you end up, where you know, where the thinking person kind of finds themselves at that point, because, you know, sort of after the dark night of the soul of it, you end up at a point of enlightenment, and you end up sort of ultimately detached from it all in some way, but not necessarily a bad way, in a kind of a balanced way. But so there's that, and then, as you say, the first part to the question: are the technologists, are they the wizards? I'd say that they're the wand, not the wizard. You know, they are the tool. That is the tool that is being used, sort of. But I definitely think, and I know you're an expert in this area, like but this concept of light, like, you know, we spoke about biophotonics, the use of light, in terms of data, manipulation of data, mass data, and big data, and the speed at which it is gathered, manipulated, and understood, and sorted, and learned from the algorithm, from the machine learning. All of that has been done literally at the speed of light. So the luciferic light is intrinsic and inseparable from, you know, and it gives you this strange, you know, when you talk about Lucifer, for example, and light in the occult sense, and light in the sense of the Kabbalah or whatever, and then you start to speak about biodigital convergence and kind of hyper data and stuff like that. It's so you're transposing these kind of concepts that are, in the one hand, ancient, and on the other hand, that are hyper modern, and it creates this strange kind of intoxicating, kind of swirling, uh, kind of blurring of the divisions of time, of epochs, of the modern, the hyper modern, and the ancient. All of it is swirling together in this spectacle that we see in front of our faces on a daily basis. So, as well as all that, you can see, you know, the objective person can see how destabilizing that is for the individual and for society. And it's like, you know, the thing is flying. This destabilization, um, you know, it's probably tied in a little bit with that concept of in Russia, when Russia was falling apart, and they called it, what's the term they had for it, Silas, where everyone was going around pretending everything was normal? Hyper normalization. So it's kind of hyper normal.
Hypernormalization, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this kind of hyper normalization going on. And as you talk about that person walking down the street, and they're walking around the cities like zombies, and they're in that. That's that hype. That is that kind of hyper normalization. It's a coping mechanism, kind of a coping mechanism. You know, this is, in a way, this to stop thinking and stop analyzing and divorce oneself from it and just get on with the here and now. Where do I, you just get myself to work, just get home, cook dinner, take my clothes out of the washing machine. I need to get petrol in my car, to get dog food, and I need to, you know, take the ashes out of the fire. And I have to dress my bed, and that's it. That's me. Like, I might go and visit my mum tomorrow if I have time, and that's as far as it goes. You know what I mean? That's as far as people can deal with the life that they're living. And a lot of people, you know, that's all they should really have to deal with. But there's no, like, how would one react? Like we mentioned in history, you had rebellions, you had upheavals, you had civil wars. Things could be done, you know, to change, to affect political change. But where would you go with any of this? You know, you've a tidal wave coming at you at a speed of knots, like, and you know, and that's why I think that I answered my own question. Where was the retaliation from national governments, for example, or national bodies anywhere in the West, against this turning tide. And what the conclusion I've come to is that they themselves realized that this was ineluctable. It couldn't be, you couldn't escape it. And they had better to try and manage it. And that's why I think that there was no sort of Luddite kind of resistance, beating of chests and onward we shall fight them on the beaches and storm,
Yeah.
and there was none of that. And I think deep down, almost on a herd level, the human society understand that too. I think on a herd level, you talk about herd immunity. This is herd passivity.
Hmm.
They've mentally already surrendered to it because it's too big. They instinctively have sensed that this thing is too big. You know.
Yeah, I think they have understood this and eluctable. A lot of the puppets, I think, understand this from a general point of view as well, of this really this
Mm,
march towards, I mean, what do you call it? The march towards the singularity of the abyss.
mm, mm,
To merge us with something that is really quite incomprehensible even to beings of perception.
mm,
Perhaps this is all cyclically determined by fatalistic mechanisms encoded into the world itself. Something that perhaps is beyond us. Um,
mm,
I think now at this juncture, I I honestly think a lot of people are just bound up in sort of imagined traditions, simulated
mm,
mythologies,
mm,
synthetic worldviews, and it's a lot of them are coping mechanisms. And I think the
mm,
only thing you can actually do that is organic and tangible, then and may pose a certain problem, of course, to the establishment and itself, provide you some form of uh, lifeboat or life jacket in this coming situation, is to build communities with people, with like-minded people. You have to
mm,
build intentional communities. That the very conspiracy that has brought about these terrible and tumultuous and tempestuous times are built upon a covenantal model. And this covenantal model is a form of volitional tribalism, which has at its core something that really is impregnable, and it's impervious to it's resilient. It's impervious to oxidation, if you will, right? To even social assimilation into other societies or whatever, right? They've developed an evolutionarily stable strategy, a stable group, and I think that's what you have to develop. I think that's the only way you're going to get out of this. You're not going to get out of this, uh, engaging in slacktivism, or even engaging in actual
mm,
active active measures, if you will. It
mm.
would take that for whatever, it's however
Well,
you interpret it. I don't think that's the way out.
I agree with you, and again, there's a kind of an irony in it too, because I think again, for take the example of the Synergy channel, they refer to themselves as the Synergy community. So this
Hmm.
word community is thrown around a lot, also by the enemy. So it has to be taken with
Yeah,
extreme care, like Tommy
exactly.
Robinson's community. We're a
Yeah.
community now.
Well,
With
it's
Tommy,
actually a hierarchy, isn't it?
yeah. Or
Yeah.
we're the only community that represents me is Sun Media, or Gript Media in Ireland represent my community, or Rebel News represent my community. You know what I mean? So there you
Hmm.
are. You're caught by if as we say in Ireland, you're caught by the balls. Pardon the expression. You're caught by the
Oh,
balls because
yeah.
it's the one thing you need, and at the same time, the enemy know that. They fucking know that well, and they're only waiting for you to look for that community and to lead you as well. So it has to be. I don't know. It has to be balanced incredibly delicately.
I agree. Yeah, it has to be on an equal footing. Certainly, and it has to be something that's not necessarily transactional. even in terms of views, right? So you don't engage with someone in an intentional community and building it if the thing is transactional, if they're, you know, demanding money off you, or demanding views, or demanding, whatever it may be, right? It has to be something that's built upon a shared mutual reciprocity. And
mm,
so with that, I think a lot of, if you use that rule of thumb, a lot of these things look just like what you're saying, controlled opposition traps. I mean, even
mm,
even the race-based nationalism, I mentioned this as well. I mean, that the thing is completely, it's onerous. It is
mm,
it's also odious, and it
mm,
really, you can see it's only going to paralyze people.
mm,
Literally paralyzes them because they're synthetic tribes. Tommy
mm,
Robinson, or Robinstein, he does not give two monkeys shits about Britain or about what happens in Britain. The guy is an agent. He
mm,
is political a prostitute as you can imagine, right? He is the dictionary definition of it. You need no words to describe or to define political prostitution. Simply use an illustration of him, right? Or I
mm,
mean, there's many of them. There's many of them, but
mm.
I think this is it's really what you're seeing is it's paving the way for, like what you're saying, a lack of resistance to it. And it's not
Yeah.
necessarily resistance as you build your identity in opposition to them. It's that you build your identity on something real, something that isn't constructed by them, that isn't
Mm.
part of the hyper reality.
Well,
I mean,
I think it was
yeah,
sorry to cut across you, and I
no, it's
just
okay.
to embellish your point, it was a big triumph of the propagandists, and it has been a big tragedy. The social tragedy is this loss of the political will of the people, and the confusion of will, and the loss of direction, and the feeling of incapacity on how to react, and the confusion, and as you say, kind of find people find themselves in these fake corridors, um, kind of hiding. But this loss of, well, how do we react? What even are we to react to? It had been very kind of disempowering, very like the carpet has been pulled out from under the kind of social, like a healthy society has an element of dissent in it, like that kind of keeps the wheel turning and keeps things. But like the dissent couldn't manifest. Like I don't see any sort of lifeblood in the youth, really, in the kind of the as much as that they're, how do you say it, that they're empowered to kind of move toward anything, or that they're against anything. It seems to be that they've conceded, and they're, if anything, they're either lost, or they're trying to acquiesce to this kind of society around them, or even the power structure, or these values. So it's like I feel they they don't know what to society doesn't know what to draw its sword against, and it doesn't even know how to draw a sword anymore. It's totally, um, it's just lost its power. It's dead in the water. It's like it's uncool. You know.
Yeah, I also think that's this move towards, what you could call, really techno monarchism, right? They're even talking about this. You had the likes of, for example, that Yarvin. By the way, Yarvin, Curtis Yarvin, who, by the way, is also Jewish, and he's related. Well, he's not related by blood, but in a sort of philosophical manner, he's related to that of Peter Thiel. I think he's an
Hmm.
advisor to Peter Thiel, or anyway, in the early 2000s, he started releasing under the pseudonym of Mencius Moldbug, a wonderful name.
Hmm.
He started writing under this pen name, essentially, um, targeted manifestos and articles and long diatribes targeted solely towards the techno, the nascent techno overlords in these startup tech firms, which came straight out of DARPA. So, for example, the likes of Zuckerberg came straight, and Facebook came straight out of DARPA LifeLog. The day that DARPA LifeLog ended in 2004 was the day that Facebook began. I'm sure that's just a big quinky dink. But anyway,
Mm.
so he was targeting these individuals, and he was, setting the trend, I guess, in culture creation. And anyway, fast forward 20 years, he's now sort of lauded, similar to Harari, as this sort of techno futuristic pioneer, intellectual. And he mentioned this. He said, and again, this is all Kabbalistic. It's not just Kabbalistic, it's actually tied into sort of Schneerson's Chabad Lubavitcher Kabbalism. And within that, you have this notion that's stated within the Tanya. And the Tanya is this idea in Hebrew, it's this concept of, and it's this concept in Chabad Lubavitch of the sort of the founding maxims of their movement, right? I believe in Hebrew it means he who studies, or the studied principles, that sort of idea. And basically, it states in there that those of the Zedek, the righteous ones, those of the in group, effectively, of this theological supremacist mystery religion or antinomial religion, their spirit is that of God, right? It's of God. However, everyone else's spirit who's not part of this minority in group is, of course, animalistic, right? So, of course, that raises some fundamental questions surrounding, well, are they completely misanthropic, and what is their eschatology about, right? And when you get to it, their eschatology is very, well, it's catastrophism, to say the least, right? They believe that the world has to be destroyed for them to recreate it and
The
repair it as God
renewal.
intended. Renewal, yeah. So they believe they have to repair what God effectively fucked up in Genesis, pardon my French. Um,
Mm.
and Yarvin states this: the trouble with biodiesel, so this is after he's mentioned how do we get rid of the useless class. One way he discusses is, well, the wards of the realm, we liquidize them, or liquidate them into biodiesel solutions, right? But he says the trouble with the biodiesel solution is that no one would want to live in a city whose public transportation was fueled, even just partly, by the distilled remains of its late underclass. However, it helps us describe the problem we are trying to solve. Our goal, in short, is our goal. It's not just his goal. Our goal, in short, is a humane alternative to genocide. That is, the ideal solution achieves the same result as mass murder, the removal of undesirable elements from society, but without any of the moral stigma. Perfection cannot be achieved on both these counts, but we can get closer than most might think. Now, again, just as I'm about to read the rest of this, and it's only another two paragraphs, um, two short paragraphs. Remember, he has the ear of Peter Thiel, of Palantir, so of
Mm.
Alex Karp, of all of the other Mossad agents, including Musk as well, Zuckerberg.
Mm.
The whole of this basically nascent tech overlord class of the Israeli. Well,
Mm.
they're affiliated with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
To put it that way. Um, So, the best humane alternative to genocide I can think of is not to liquidate the wards of the state, either metaphorically or literally, but to virtualize them. A virtualized human is in permanent solitary confinement, waxed like a bee larva, into a cell with which is sealed except for emergencies. This also ties into Rosicrucianism and the older illustrations of Rosa, Dat Rosa Melapibus, or from the rose, the bees draw honey, right? So the idea is that effectively, the hive of these artificial constructions, societies, civilizations, ideologies, religions, kings themselves and all of the imagined status and authorities within society, they draw their sustaining sucre from that of the drones and from that of their attention, which itself is the attention of God, because we all carry that rose, that essence of the primordial
Mm.
potential within us. So this is what they feed on, like some sort of energy vampire, right? As a proxy. Anyway, he says this would drive him insane, except that the cell contains an immersive virtual reality interface which allows him to experience a rich, fulfilling life in a completely imaginary world. The virtual worlds of today are already exciting enough to distract many away from their real lives. They will only get better, nor is productive employment precluded in this scenario. For example, wards can perform manual labour through telepresence as members of society. However, they might as well not exist. And because cells are sealed and needs no guards, virtualization should be much cheaper than present day imprisonment. I like virtualization because it can be made to scale. I don't think there is any scenario under which San Francisco is burdened with more than a few thousand wards. Many other regions of the earth, however, contain large numbers of human beings whose existence may well prove an unequivocal liability to the owners of any ground on which they would reside. If so, they can be virtualized, creating giant human Wachowski honeycombs of former Bezonians whose shanty towns can be cleared and redeveloped as villas for retired oil company executives. This is what they're, of course, doing in Gaza with the whole IMEC corridor and Ben Gurion Canal. And he states this lastly: of course, virtualization is a drastic alternative and itself unlikely to happen. Charity is just too popular these days. Before anyone becomes a ward of the realm, any person or organization is free to adopt him as a dependent as a matter of mutual agreement. His new guardian is responsible, for his actions and be free to tell him what to do. The ideal relationship for any attempt at rehabilitation. It's basically what the Salvation Army does now, I believe. If all else fails, there's always the honeycomb. So
Mm.
that's the type of people that they are at the heart of the intellectual I mean the intellectual class that are viewed and idolized by, it would appear, again, from what we can see looking up at the pyramid scheme of society. They're idolized by the rich, right? They're idolized by the people who supposedly wield power. Of course, they
Mhm.
themselves are probably just, well, they're all of the same sort of ilk. They're all of this sort of theological supremacist group. I mean, I won't name them, but uh, you know, are they similar to Sabrina Wallace, but only for the rich, for only the elite, for only the middle management group of this nascent world order, right? Are they trying to build a consensus here from the top and to the bottom? Is Sabrina Wallace no different than Yarvin? Of course, her rhetoric changes, her stories change, her background changes, but are these characters effectively, are they conveying the same message in terms of what they're trying to do and trying to build, which is sort of culture creation and the manufacturing of consensus through disclosure or revelation of the method, a controlled disclosure? What's your opinions upon that?
Well, potentially, yeah, because like what you have now, you have seismic change, you have great change in a period now of huge change, like the technology, this biodigital stuff, all of it it causes society to go into a great tumult. And the problem from the power structure's point of view is to manage all this essentially and to maintain their own supremacy. So that's a critical issue for them. Um, it's like the ambition is once the great work, if you will, is essentially the maintenance of their position through this time, and to usher this time through and to usher mankind into the new era, the renewal, and to maintain their position. So all of these narratives, all these people that we're talking about, essentially have a role to play, and actually very, very minor role in the greater scheme of things, minuscule role, but a role nonetheless, because they to try and cover all their bases. So that's potentially, you know, how I see it, because I think they are worried about. I think they're worried about change having an adverse effect in their position. You know,
I
and
agree. It's all about predictability, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
well, man, that was an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I really thank you for your time. And
Thank
you know,
you indeed.
we're going to leave it there for today, folks. But
Great stuff.
we have just scratched the surface, in truth, of the labyrinth, and you know what Zeal has laid out before us is, I think, a sort of sobering cartography of the modern battlefield, and you know we're not just fighting. I guess needles and mandates and political theatre. You're also seeing a sort of Trojan horse also closing in as well, and the walls themselves are being rewired with light and frequency. So it's many things to ponder and to think about, but with information comes a great sort of emancipation, I think. And you know, many thanks to you, Zeal.